but I think it's better to start right away. And if anyone else wants to join, the door is open. So welcome to this panel here at the Global Media Forum. I hope you're having a nice day in Bonn. My name is Waslat Hasrat Nazimi. I'm a journalist with DW. I work for DW News for social media and for the Afghan department. And this panel is called Empowering Women in Emerging Economies. And we're focusing on what tourism can do for women to empower them and to help them to become self-sustainable. Now, diversity in the labor market is one of the century's key policy issues, and this panel looks at how gender influences the working experiences of men and women differently, as seen through the lens of the tourism industry. As female empowerment drives economic development, diversity in the labor market should enhance the economic situation in developing and emerging countries. Now, we will look at examples how tourism is changing the situation of women in emerging economies and in emerging countries, but we will also look at how tourism can maybe create also problems for these women. And I'm really happy that we are an all-women panel. This was not originally planned, but it turns out to be an all-women panel. I'm really delighted about that. I'm really happy. And we have Chantal Baca right next to me, to my left, from Picala Bikes, which is a project that wants to bring development through bicycles in Marrakesh, in Morocco, and she will tell us about her project in a while. And then we also have Jane Ashton, who is the Sustainability Director of the TUI Group, and she's also chair of the Advisory Committee. Then we have Madhi Sharma. She is a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, but she's also a freelance journalist covering the South Asian region, and she's also head of a think tank, and I'm really happy that she's here today. And then we have Katrin Hartkopf, who is from Plan International, and she is also working for foundation management. She's the director, and she's also working with TUI Group. Thank you for being here. And I want to start with my first question with Jane Ashton. When we think about women empowerment, we don't naturally think about tourism, so it does not come to our minds immediately right away. So what can tourism do to empower women?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Not many people know how large the tourism industry is. If you look at both direct and indirect and induced impacts, tourism is responsible for around 10% of global GDP. About 1 in every 11 jobs are related to tourism. And actually, tourism has, compared to other industries, a disproportionately large number of women working in it. It's also an incredibly important industry for least developed countries. The UN has just identified in a recent report that 45 out of 47 least development countries have tourism as a key development area. So the potential for women to enter the industry and grow in the industry is tremendous, and that's something that we have a big focus on at TUI, particularly through the TUI Care Foundation and the various projects that we're pursuing through TUI Care Foundation.
And what are these projects focusing on?
We have various pillars. We have the TUI Chances pillar, which is working with schools and education to raise awareness of tourism as a potential employment area for children, generally to empower children, particularly girls, through education. We have the TUI Academies, which we are developing with strong partners such as Plan, which are focused on vocational training, and some of them particularly focused on vocational training for girls to be involved in the tourism industry. So specific projects we've had ongoing in places like Tunisia, Namibia, and right now with Plan in the Dominican Republic, in Brazil, in Morocco, where we're really working to try and get more girls educated and vocationally trained to have a really fulfilling career within tourism. And then we have another pillar, TUI Cares, where we're working with destinations, so destinations such as Jamaica or Mexico, where we're working with women entrepreneurs to enable them to produce souvenirs or to produce goods that could be sold to our hotels. So a number of projects there to really help women and small businesses, create small businesses and grow small businesses that can become part of the tourism supply chain. So there's huge potential, there's a huge amount to do still.
Katrin Hartkopf, what can tourism achieve what other projects, development projects, cannot? Why do we need tourism?
Why do we need tourism? Well, first of all, from my perspective, there's international tourism, local tourism. And if you put it at a very broad scale and you talk about hospitality, so the general knowledge of hospitality is needed in every country. So if I run a little restaurant, if I run a little coffee shop, and I don't have these very basic skills, then my business does not thrive. So, of course, tourism and education in tourism and all around this can really make a difference for the families, for the young entrepreneurs.
But isn't it like in many countries, many traditional countries, that these fields are mainly for men, especially in restaurants? When it comes to restaurants or hotels, you mostly see men. So what can you do about it?
That's actually true. We just come back from a wonderful project visit to in Sri Lanka, and when you look at the situation in Sri Lanka, you only see men in the hospitality or in the tourism business, and that's definitely a problem because guests are, what I learned, are complaining that there are not enough women in that business, and they're asking and saying this is not really equal. They should have a chance to have an income, a stable income. And that's interesting because the reason behind it is actually lies in the families. The families don't believe that a young woman should leave the family, should leave home, should be independent, should have her own income, and actually even have a good education or even finish school. So that's something that we as Plan are trying to change, and we are very happy to have TUI as a big partner to make a vast difference in countries like Sri Lanka, where we're saying, okay, youth economic employment is very important, because if you look at the data, that's really one of the key issues. Many young people, 156 million young people are not employed, and that's just causes many other problems. Like,
let's stick to this example, Sri Lanka. Madi Sharma, you know the region. Do you agree? Is the mentality that women should stay at home? Is it like that? Or what do you think? What are the real reasons, and what can be done about it?
Okay, so starting from your starting point, your opening sentence, which was, you're really happy to have an all-female panel. I'm not. We shouldn't have all-male or all-female panels. Thank you. It's all right, my boss is sitting there and he knows I always tweet about all-male panels. We have to remove the stereotyping that we're doing. And just as an example, I want to share with you how we all stereotype against everything. Would you employ me? I have no qualifications. I have no skills. I have no training. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. You look at my CV, you are not going to give me any help whatsoever. And yet today I'm running 11 companies around the world. And there are millions, if not billions, of women who could be doing exactly the same thing. But we stereotype. Even women are stereotyping against other women. Please don't take this wrong, right? TUI is doing some great work, especially on women and the development and empowerment of women in tourism. How many women are on their board? Have a look. It's not 50-50. It's nowhere near 50-50. And this is the point. Unless we start to reflect gender and a balanced gender in the economy, all economies, it doesn't filter down. So in the European Union, we have a problem, but we also have a massive problem in Sri Lanka. But it's everywhere. And that's the stereotype that I think we need to move from, because we should be valuing human capital, all human capital, instead of judging people. Everybody has a talent. And this is where I believe tourism is one of the ways that talents, especially from women, can come out more and more. And I can share a few examples with you if you want me to.
Yeah, we could do that later, definitely. Yes. I would like to hear them. But maybe, Jane, you would like to reply to Madhi Sharma.
You're
What's
right,
your reaction?
It's not 50-50, but across the group, 30% of employees in leadership positions are women. And that's a group that's 56% women. So there's a gap. There's definitely a gap. There's a lot to do. But actually on the supervisory boards in Germany, it's 38% women. So yeah, we're not 50-50. But it's definitely recognized, and there's work to do there. And so, I mean, just on your point on 50-50, so for instance, I was visiting our academy in Agadir a couple of years ago, and they work very hard there to have an annual intake of about 90 students a year to try and ensure 50-50. But it's hard. They have to work very hard to achieve that equal balance. So a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, even here in the West, I mean, it's something we all have to work for. But I think, Madhi Sharma, you really raised an important point. So what are the stereotypes that we are facing when it comes to empowering women and working to empowering women?
Well, it starts in the decision-making processes and in the policies. So if the policies are originally set by men, and here I'm talking about the whole set of the policies, so from the needs of the people all the way through to the implementation and the dissemination of funds, we don't know how much is going to women, to the support of women, because there's no accountability, there's no monitoring, and there's no evaluation of any of the processes that we're doing. And this means that, actually, if I take the European Union as an example, every single piece of policy is skewed towards men because the men are top-heavy in all of the decision-making bodies, in all of the EU institutions. Now, that affects how much money goes towards development, to development aid, and how much of that then filters down towards women. Now, this is where it's really important, because human rights can never, ever be implemented unless we have economic, social, and cultural rights. And economic rights can never be given to anybody if you cannot have the ability to work. Social rights, education, access to health, access to legal systems can never be given unless you've got that, know how to access that in the first place. And that's why the support must be equally distributed to men and to women, to give them the same balanced level playing field to be able to get engaged as men are engaged. Because actually women have as much to contribute to society as men do.
So do you think that this is already implemented?
It's not implemented, and it's completely missing. Mm-hmm. It's completely missing. In the European Economic and Social Committee, we're the House of Civil Society. We are less than 25% women. In the European Parliament, I think it's 35% women. But in the EU Council, it's, I think, 3 or 4 out of the 28 member states. So but it affects everything, and I think that's the important message that I want to get across is it's every single piece of policy is actually discriminating against women and therefore against the support that we want to give to women. So if we're giving money out and it's for education or for tourism or for entrepreneurship, we should make sure that an equal amount has been given to women as has been given to men. And that comes from the monitoring process, and that's the bit we're not doing. It was said by Amnesty International this morning, there's no accountability. And that accountability is affecting every piece of development that's going on in the world. And that's why we're also seeing a widening gap in inequalities.
Mm. Thank you, Madi Sharma. I think we should maybe hear some positive examples to change the mood a little, even though it's very important, the points that you mentioned. So, Kantal Baka, I mentioned earlier that you are the director of Picala Bikes, and it would be really great to tell the audience a little bit more about this interesting project. So, Kantal, you prepared a presentation, so it would be great if you could talk about it, and if you want, you can also show us the presentation. Maybe we can get some technical support, but this should work like this. And now, in the PowerPoint? Here are the videos. Oh, and is this microphone on? It should be on.
Very much for having me here, and I would like to explain a little bit of what we are doing with our project Picala in Morocco, Marrakesh, and I will talk about the project, and meanwhile there will be some videos supporting a little bit my story, and so you can have a look at the image, and at the same time I will explain what we are doing. So Picala is a very personal project which I started in 2015, and the word Picala comes from it's a Moroccan street language word for bicycle, so it's a very local word to express the word of the bicycle. And the aim of our project, Picala, is to share the advantages of cycling with small communities in Morocco. It's not only in rural areas that people can benefit from cycling. There's a great necessity also for cycling in bigger cities. So therefore, Picala has started in Marrakesh. You can look over here. We're right in Marrakesh. And the importance there is to create education through the bike, create jobs. So job creation is very important, and to address environmental issues because the city suffers a lot from pollution. And for us, the main thing is job creation for youth, because the population of Morocco has 70% of the population of Morocco is under the age of 34. So youth creation of jobs for youth is really necessity for the society and for the development. And so there's various activities that we do. You saw it briefly in the video that we just saw, but it went very quickly. But the importance is that we have people coming to learn. So we have a workshop where we bring bicycles from Holland, which you will see right over here. Here it comes. We bring bicycles from Holland, second-hand. We brought more than 300 bicycles to Marrakesh so far, and they're used in our workshop where youth is trained to repair them, to fix them, to learn how to maintain them, and they're used for all various activities to take people around the city. Here you see how we training youth about doing bicycle tours and to promote ecotourism. And last but not least, we are here working on the mobile bicycle workshop, which is an invitation for all the Moroccan people in Marrakesh to come and to fix and repair their bicycles. And it was a huge success. Everyone came, everyone wanted to fix their bicycle. Hundreds of people came every day to fix their bikes. We fixed more than 500 bicycles during the climate conference. And here we have the Minister of Environment that opened for us the workshop. So there was a huge, we kind of created a buzz in Marrakesh. And the importance to include youth is very important because they bring the spirit. So every activity that we do, youth is included. So if it's mechanics, if it's doing bicycle tours, or if it's designing, in every activity there is youth involved. We are completely based on youth activity. And the importance that I would like to explain about having girls in our project is I am from the field, so we are there. It's a very small project, but we can see a lot of things that are happening with girls. There's a movement happening from my point of view that girls are going outside, and the importance is to give them tools. If they don't find a safe environment to develop themselves, they will not. So they need a trigger. They need to find a very comfortable situation to develop themselves. And within Picala, we have our board in Morocco is completely based out of women. And in our organization, there's just women. And every time when we go to the municipality, they are completely surprised because they think it's a bicycle project. So it's completely a men's subject, but it's completely run by women. They find men in our workshop. They are teachers. We have mechanics, of course. We have a lot of men that are coming, but we even have girls that are learning with us to become a bicycle mechanic. And what we do for tourism, because we have this opportunity with TUI Care Foundation to promote ecotourism in Marrakesh on a bigger scale, we have also the collaboration of the municipality to promote that. We've started with just cycling classes for girls, because there's a lot of girls that are not able to cycle. So we teach a lot of girls at the moment how to use the bike for their mobility, for their freedom, and how to become a real official bicycle guide. And we have various bicycles that we have that go around the city to take tourists in a different way through Marrakesh, to discover Marrakesh in a different way, and from the perspective of youth. So it's not a historical experience, but we really want to show the personal development of the young people that we've trained, boys and girls, and they can explain their story towards the tourists that they take around the city. And it's a project that goes very quickly, it grows very well, and it attracts a great variety of different kind of people. And I think that's very important to protect if you're doing something, especially also in Morocco, to keep the equality between men and women, and that there's a safe surrounding that people and the project can flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chantal. Maybe you can join us again. So now the first thing that comes to my mind, we hear a lot about Arabic countries and girls that are not able to ride a bicycle or drive in a car. So how's the situation in Morocco in the first place?
Well, Picalas is based in Marrakesh, and Marrakesh is kind of an exception. There has been a French period in Morocco when there were a lot of women actually on the bikes, because the French, they really promoted bicycle use, and it was for short distances, so the women were in complete jalaba, moving around the city by bike. And this remained. So Marrakesh is one of the few cities where you see women on mopeds, where you see women on bikes, where you see women on the back of a bike, or they move around. They are driving a car. So Marrakesh is pretty upfront. There are other cities that we will start the project, and we find a little bit more difficulty to keep. Young girls are cycling, that's not a problem, but at the age that they finished university, it becomes difficult.
And why becomes it difficult? Why does it become difficult?
I think that is the mentality that comes back, like you're not anymore a young girl, you're supposed to marry, you're supposed to be serious with your life, and a bicycle is too, there's something in between your legs. They say, this is what they say, this is what I heard, that they are saying, there's something in between your legs. It's completely not appropriate, yes. Yeah.
So do you think that with your project you can change this mentality?
Yes, I think what we are doing, we are very focused on youth. So it's something that is starting to become a wave. So we do a lot of videos. The videos that you saw are very brief videos that we share on our social media that are very popular among youth. So they share them a lot. There's a kind of a new hype around sustainability, health, sports. People like also to do sports. And then women also, they are able to kind of connect to it. And because I think the most important thing is to find a positive way to trigger people. And Moroccans are very curious, and they really want, if you trigger them, they start to change. So it is happening, yes.
Katrin Hartkopf, you want to add something to this?
I would very much like to add something. First of all, thank you for sharing this, and also your experiences about prejudices and having something between your leg is just a perfect saying for many things that women have to fight against, right? If it's FGM or other causes. So what is interesting and what I think is very important, it is so important to work with the whole family, to work with the communities, to have girls' rights clubs and youth rights clubs, and to really open it and set positive examples. If you have one girl that then becomes a tourist guide and the family understands, oh, now there's an income out of this useless hobby of that one girl, right? And they learn that she's independent, how she develops, that she can speak up. And then, she gets other children in that. That's actually very a wonderful thing. That's a perfect case study, as we would say, right? But it starts with the families. It starts with this very basic education. It starts with these kinds of role models, and then you can really have a rollout.
Maddie Sharma?
Just call me Maddie. Sorry. I'm really proud to be a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, but I'm a member of the Employers Group because I'm an entrepreneur as well. And there was an occasion where, as employers, it's really important for us to look at supply chain, start to finish. And I was invited by Air France to look at the issue of traveling sex offenders going to Madagascar. And I went. I saw some horrific sights, absolutely horrific. A European was known as a euro with legs. So basically the fact that they would pay €1 to take a young person to a hotel or down the street or something, the girl was told by her family, and this is why I'm picking this one up, the girl was encouraged by her family to do this. So the children were actually seen as tools and not as children.
But what do you think, what drives these families to
it
do
was just
like
sheer poverty. They had no other avenue for any income. And in some cases, the parents even built a shelter at the end of the garden for the girls to take, not just the tourists too.
And if I may add, it's also a girl is worth less than a boy.
But the way the story turns is that when I came back to Europe with Save the Children, we shared with the European Commission and the European Parliament what we had seen, that these travelling sex offenders were going over, were abusing children and coming back, and the law was changed. But on top of that, we also managed to talk to the NGOs there and explain to the NGOs that, okay, you're taking the children into a safe house, but then what? You're putting them back out on the streets again. So we started to talk to them about entrepreneurship and about creating artistic projects and creating crafts that then could be sold in the airport, very much like some of the examples that TUI is doing with its case studies. So I think this is the way to empower, to educate, to train, to give technical support. All those things are needed to drive the change, and that way we can remove that stereotype. But it's understanding what some of the problems are in the first place. And sometimes the NGOs feel like they're doing good because they're taking the girls off the street, but then they're putting them back out the street. So what's the solution? And one of the solutions, just one, is entrepreneurship, and that's the value of entrepreneurship. It's why I am where I am today, because I managed to survive and strengthen myself through building a small business, and now I've got bigger businesses. but there's a real power in entrepreneurship, and this is why it is great to see organizations supporting entrepreneurship.
You've mentioned sustainability. Now, maybe we can hear it from the Sustainability Director of TUI.
Well, I was just going to say precisely what you're saying there is something that we're trying to do through some of our projects. I mean, particularly one in the Dominican Republic with Plan at the moment, which is working with vulnerable girls, and one of our important hotel partners, Blue Diamond Hotels, where the girls are trained in a safe environment on hospitality skills, and are working in the hotels and finish that course with technical qualifications that will empower them to have qualifications and to have a career in tourism, whereby they've come from very vulnerable backgrounds, and that's a model that we've pursued in different areas over the years. I don't know, Catherine, you know that project in detail, so you might want to talk about
Well,
that.
we're planning to scale it up, as we mentioned, in Sri Lanka as well as in Vietnam, and really get many more youth into permanent deployment.
Why do you think, we talked about this before the panel started, why do you think it's so important to create employment for especially the youth? Katrin.
Well, what's the alternative? If they don't have an employment, where do they go? We shared the number yesterday in the news. The new number is 65 million refugees worldwide. And when you look at the facts, internal displaced people is 62 million. 62 million. And when you look at it, many of them are youth without any chances to survive in their own countries. If you give them a chance, they are happy to stay and happy to make their own countries thrive, but they need access to education, and as we all mentioned, equal access to education. It's just not fair that girls don't go to school. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, I never believed these numbers, but over 60 million children, girls, no, sorry, not children, girls are not attending schools. Damn it, that's not fair. And why is that? The regulations are in place, yeah, theoretically the laws are in place, but nobody's there. And also you need to support these families, that they can send the kids to school, that they know how important it is. And it's wonderful if these girls later have a good job and maybe have access to a wonderful job, even in the tourism industry would be great, yeah. They have the right to leave, to lead an independent life and have their own income.
Yes. Maybe I can,
Go on,
just
please, no.
shortly interrupt. But of course, economic reasons are not the only reasons that we have a refugee influx in Europe, for example. So now I lost my point because I really care for this topic so much. But yeah, we don't. That's not the only reason. We have economic reasons and we have the refugee reasons. Climate change, of course, but I really lost my point. So maybe you can take over.
Well, I want to pick up on,
and I will think about what I wanted to say.
On statistics and on proof about sort of the value of women. Entrepreneurship is my baby. Female entrepreneurship is something I'm really, really passionate about. So here's some figures. That the highest number of companies created since the 2008 crisis have been by women. The greatest number of jobs created have been by women-owned companies. And the greatest number of those SMEs, that small to medium-sized enterprises that were created by women, were migrant women. And it's not just that they're empowering themselves, they're empowering their families and their communities as a result. And so this is why it's so important that we collect the data, because the data and the statistics that I know about are American statistics. We don't collect the statistics in Europe, because if we did, it would show the discrimination. And this is what we've got to change, because otherwise we are channeling the money in the wrong place. It's a well-known fact that if you give a girl a cow, she will feed the community. If you give a man a cow, he will just feed himself. And this is... It is a stereotype, but we know about how empowering women affects more and more people. And from a company perspective, if you look at women on boards, which is why I picked up the women on boards thing, because that's one of the things that I do now. It's my pound in my pocket. Where am I going to spend my pound? I'm not going to spend it in a company where they have an all-male board. Right? So I've now started to look at what the balance is on the board. But where you have women on boards, you have an increase in productivity, an increase in profitability, an increase on return on investment, and an increase in corporate social responsibility. These are all the things, these are all the business benefits that we strive for as entrepreneurs and as business people. So it makes sense to put women in the decision-making process also, because their corruption decreases and transparency increases. So it's not that I'm banging on about the gender argument. It's about the economic, social, cultural, and environmental argument. And it's an imperative now that we change the model that we have, because the current model that we've got is not working.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for that. You can also say, educate a girl and she will educate the whole society. That's also true. And I remember now what I was going to say to you, Katrin Hartkopf. My question was that, of course, insecurity is the other reason that we have a refugee influx. So what happens to countries like Tunisia, where we had attacks? I know that you're also active in Tunisia. Or Turkey. We have the number of people who are going to Turkey for tourist reasons is decreasing. So what can we do about that? What happens to the women you train in tourism and now there are no tourists?
Yeah, well, you're right. The number of people going to Turkey has decreased, although we're hopeful that that's going to grow in the next few years. I think if you've actually trained women, then they have those skills, and they have those skills lifelong. So whether they go somewhere where they can use those skills, or whether they're not able to travel but able to use those skills again as soon as the business comes back, then you have empowered them lifelong. But yes, I mean, security and fear of terrorism is something we live with in every walk of life at the moment, including tourism. Just on the plus side, one of the things that we were particularly pleased to see in terms of tourism as a contributor to the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals was the way that tourism is now cited quite explicitly in the new 2015-2030 Sustainable Development Goals as a driver for decent employment and as a driver for sustainable consumption and production. So it's great to see some international recognition for tourism as a real social and economic driver, obviously of women's employment as well.
But of course, yeah, economic reasons are also very important when it comes to deciding whether you will leave your country or not. And Morocco is also one of those countries. Even though Germany declares it as a secure country, we have refugees from Morocco as well. So do you think that maybe a project like yours, Chantal, can give a perspective to people who are willing to leave their country? Do you maybe have any experiences, anyone you met who told you their story?
Yeah, it's very hard to see. You have university, and a lot of people are going to university, but after university there is also not the future. So you kind of fall into a hole with no perspective. And we have a lot of youth that is kind of coming to our project because they're interested, because they feel the vibration of something that is moving, that is active, and that wants to do something, that doesn't stay in a solid position. But it's very hard to see a lot because our project is still small. I cannot include everyone at the same time. We need to grow step by step, and it's hard to see like a lot of youth has a feeling that they need to go abroad to find some better life, and it's hard that they don't find the energy, they don't find the tools to invest in their own country. So you have kind of ghosts, you get kind of a ghost society of people, young people that don't invest in their own country, that don't believe in what they're doing there, and just think that somewhere else might be the future, even though they might never go to another country. So we do, I find a lot of boys and girls that talk with me about this, their problems about this. And I think it's very important that they, like projects like Picala, gives them a reason to start their own engine again. They need kind of a trigger. They need kind of, it's all about giving them tools and giving them a road, a direction. And what we also try is that our project is growing in different ways, and we try that everyone within our project can become like a auto-entrepreneur, as they call it in French. Like it's like a small, a small entrepreneur. Yeah. And that gives them the possibility to be employed within our project, so they can kind of provide their own service for our project. So we kind of try to activate them by themselves. So they don't wait for our request to do something. We actually ask them to see if they can offer us more, that they can, and we provide the bikes, and you can do the tours, and if you find more people to take around, we will provide all the bicycles and all the materials for you. So it's a kind of you have to activate, and they just need a few hooks to get to find their track. Yeah, it's definitely, I believe in small projects, very local, very close to the people that are in between the students that feel the energy and their needs. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would also like to share a small story that happened in Sri Lanka. A 24-year-old girl shared the story. She's living in a very small area in the northern part of the country, close to Tamil area, and her family had suffered a lot during the war times, and the war is not over a long time ago, 6, 5, 7 years ago. And she said, without that project that we are now enlarging with TUI, she would have no chance. And she was ready to pack her bag, her small bag, and go to Doha. And then she learned that we're enlarging the project. And she said, yes, I need a hands-on training.
Maybe for the audience, you can explain going to Doha, what that
well,
means.
Going to Doha or any other of the Emirates countries means these girls go there, they get a ticket, they basically get trafficked by somebody saying, okay, we offer you a job in a nice household. But we know, and many of you know, that these young people never get paid. We know many cases of Nepalese working in Doha, working for the football league and so on, and never get paid, and many of them never return. And so
there's sexual exploitation.
Sexual exploitation as household slaves. I mean, whatever fantasy you have, it applies, right? So she said, now I see a chance. Sri Lanka is developing. Tourism is picking up. That's definitely a big chance. And again, I want to emphasize, tourism is not only working in a hotel. It could be in a local bakery. It could be as a seamstress. It could be in many other fields. So they're really ready to invest in their own countries. They want to stay, and they want to support their families, right? But it's again and again, I have to say, it's important to also work with the parents and to make it clear how important it is to have education and to give the youth a chance to go and get a higher education, continue school, and so on.
So, Mari, if you don't want to add something, I want to start the Q&A session. Great, because we have a few questions, I think. I saw someone over there, and maybe my colleague in the back. Do you have a microphone to pass around? Okay, it's coming. Okay, maybe we'll start with this lady over here because she was the first one. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to Kantal's project, which really is fantastic, I think. I lived more than a decade in India, and since I cycled all my life, I would always cycle. And I was teaching in a college, and I was, when I started the first, none of the girls or boys would ever cycle, or I was a faculty, so none of them would ever cycle. Yeah. And when I left the college, the front was full of cycles. It was very easy in the end to lead by example. And what it does, I took my road bike to India and I formed a road bike group with, of course, young women who could be my daughters. And I understood that the oppression of women also is manifest in the body. So the women have never learned physical activity, that physical activity also empowers them. And so I taught women, a lot of women, road biking actually, and swimming also. And it changed them. It changed their personality. It made them proud. And I think that, to add to your project, it is not only an entrepreneur project, but it gives strength through the experience that you can achieve something with your body. And, you know, I understood that when you are told as a small girl all the time, oh, you can't do that, you shouldn't exhaust yourself, oh, no, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. It has a lifelong, it does something into your behavior lifelong. And it's very, very difficult for them to change that. But when they do change, the experience is fantastic.
So thank you for your input. Do you also have a question, or do you want just, okay, add some input?
Thank you so much.
Okay, over there we have two more, and then in the front. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to share a successful story about the entrepreneur, and also some raise a question about a bad perception about women's job and women's employment in
so maybe
tourism
you can
sector.
Share your experience briefly. And
in
then
Iraqi Kurdistan, about 4 years ago, a woman opened a kebab restaurant, and it was something really new in such a rural area. Now more than 30 people work in this kebab restaurant. It is very, very famous kebab restaurant. Even it attracts tourists all around the country to this area. This is the successful story. But the issue is in the majority of underdeveloped Middle Eastern countries, there is bad and terrible perception about women's job in tourism sector. When you talk about women's job in tourism sector, they immediately think about prostitution. So I don't know what could be done to correct this bad perception and how to deal with it. But it's really a major issue for the Islamic countries, because there is also a historical and social reason for this. There has been a terrible human trafficking, like what they said.
So who do you want to answer this question, or just?
I forgot the name for the lady who focuses on the entrepreneur.
So the story of your woman, where was she?
She's in a rural village near to the town of Halabja in northeast of Iraqi Kurdistan, near to Iranian border.
So it was the same for me. I started making samosas in my kitchen at home and ended up employing 35 people, all long-term unemployed. So this is why entrepreneurship for me is so important, because you give back. And this is the great thing about business for me. It's about giving back. I asked my dad if I could become an air hostess. And I was told, definitely not. It's only for prostitutes. So that perception was there even in a middle-class Indian family. And now I think the way we can get over this is to put up the role models of the women who have done it and succeeded. So I've just finished a report on women in the transport sector. And one of the things that we've been doing is highlighting the number of women who are now pilots, who are air hostesses, who are doing really great jobs, and the other things that they do beyond being just an air hostess. So the fact that if you're on British Airways cabin crew, they're also doing training with entrepreneurs, training in schools, and this sort of thing. We have to just remove that perception, but we have to share the stories, and I don't think we're sharing enough of the stories. And it's the same for the whole of the industry. You know, women who drive lorries, it's also not acceptable. But we have a shortage of lorry drivers. And in all of the transport sector, but also all of the tourism sector, we still have shortages which women could fill. So, yeah.
We also need women leaders in that, and also we have to increase the income, because that's another prejudice. If you work for tourism, in the tourism sector, you don't make enough money, okay? So if we change that by training, and then have women leaders in that field. Just imagine a Sri Lankan hotel boss. Yeah, that would be wonderful. And if that's in the news, then the Sri Lankan people see, oh, see, here's a positive role model, and that's what's really, really needed.
Okay, thank you. I know that we all have something to add, but we have to go on. Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I am the International Affairs editor for a Danish radio station, public service radio. Madi Sharma, I thought your thoughts were on that nobody wanted to hire you or would have hired you in your current state was really interesting, and I was wondering if you could add some more on what media can do to break down the prejudices that are holding a lot of women back, a lot of communities back, in fact. Because I represent Danish media. In Denmark, we have only a fourth of women sources to our news stories. That fourth are mainly in the news of parenting, of gardening, of beauty, fashion, etc. I do a foreign news hour. You can imagine a lot of men. I'm often, sometimes disgracefully, the only woman. So, you know, obviously a permanent figure, but still. So we have a lot to work, even in Scandinavia, we have a lot of work to do. But how do we do it?
So I'm afraid the majority of you in the room who have all spent your time doing qualifications and got degrees and everything else are not going to like the answer to this, but we need to tear up the CV. We need to stop asking for CVs and start asking for people, what can you contribute and how can you contribute to my organization? Because actually, if you look at why we use CVs, did you know it takes 75 seconds to review a CV? 67% of CVs are rejected for the email address. 80% of CVs are rejected because of the picture. I think it's 75% of CVs are selected by a computer. So the fact that we're doing all this means we are losing out on human talent. And so companies and media organizations are actually losing out because the best talent is slipping them by. And I know, because I'm also a freelance journalist, as a journalist now, the women are so discriminated, and especially TV and media, because I used to be a non-exec director of a TV company, getting women onto the anchor women, if they're not gorgeous and below the age of 40, you've got no chance. We've got to remove all these stereotypes, and that's another reason why I'm still pushing for more women in the senior positions of the decision making. That means on the board, because it comes down from the top. And so unless we have more than 40% of either gender, we've got to have either gender on the boards, we're not going to get the change. But we've got to move away from the model that we have in place at the minute, because society is losing out. So role models, but also changing the decision-making process, I think is the only way we're going to get it done.
So maybe the media can portray these role models more often.
Get women off the beauty pages and onto the business pages.
It's okay. We had one more question over here, and then one in the back.
My name is Bettina Metz. I'm the Executive Director of UN Women National Committee Germany. And I have a question to Jane Ashton. If she's aware of the Women's Empowerment Principles made by UN Women and Global Compact, who is a tool to offer guidance to enterprises to empower women in the workplace and in the community. It's a tool for big companies to strengthen women inside the company and outside as consumers or partners. Are you aware of it?
No, I'm not aware of it, actually. I mean, we're members of the UN Global Compact and report against the Compact's principles, but no, please.
Yeah, Women's Empowerment
to send
Principles.org, UN Women. Please have a look at it.
Yeah, no, I will do. And one thing that we haven't talked about is actually the power of the formal industry, the tourism industry, through its supply chain to try and drive change. And that's been a huge focus of mine for the last 10 years, working with our thousands of suppliers to train in our policies and principles and our certification, third-party certification requirements. And I think that is a powerful tool that large companies can really wield to drive change. I mean, so much of what we've talked about is sort of endemic and institutional, which, as one industry player, we can't do a huge amount about, but certainly we can influence our supply chain. We can influence the products that we develop and sell. So it'd be really useful to see that tool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to thank UN Women for putting as a priority domestic violence, because 1 in 3 women in the world face domestic violence, and it is probably the thing that stops us from being empowered most. So thank you to UN Women for putting this at the top of the agenda. It is the first and the most important one. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. We had one last question in the back.
Hello, my name is Ina Darmstädter. First of all, I want to thank you for all your contributions. You're really encouraging and empowering. Have you worked out like a compendium or like a collection with all the experience you've made through the last years, or with best practice examples that we can hand out to women? In my case, we're working with women in Palestine, exactly in this topic, to empower them to start up. So Start Up Palestine for Women is a project, and what can we give them? Will you come to Palestine and give workshops and perhaps some funds, or would you at least publish what you've collected throughout the last years?
Just very briefly, we have a TUI Care Foundation magazine, which is actually profiles a number of our projects, a number of which are focused on women's empowerment and women's education. And that is actually at the entrance here. There's some piles of the magazine at the entrance to the TUI Care Foundation magazine. So that's just one example that you can take away with you today.
Yeah, and maybe you can get together and talk about it after the panel. I have to close the panel now because we've reached the end, and I really want to thank you for being a great audience, and I really want to thank my panelists because it was very insightful, and your heartfelt words were very motivating, and I think the audience agrees on that. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
will, oder wie? Soll ich loslegen, wann ich will, oder wie machen wir es? So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dieter May. I'm responsible with BMW's organization for digital products and services, which means how do we position the car as one digital touch point in the smart life of our consumers. And obviously we are here at a media conference, and the interesting thing is that media, also in the context car, plays a more and more important role going forward. If you think about autonomous driving, the captive time customers have within the car, what are they going to do? I mean, you can consume a lot of media in there. If it's personalized, if it's put forward in the right way, depending on the situation you're in. And the car itself is also generating a lot of content, which is also an interesting aspect on top of the pure consumption mechanism. So let me briefly show you what we're doing in that environment smart car, the connected car. BMW is basically now more than 100 years old, and we've just entered basically the next phase of our corporate history. And our new strategy, which is called Number One Next, is based on 4 big pillars. And they are all somehow related to digital transformation. And so our industry is also undergoing that digital transformation in a very, very significant way, because it's not only to digitalize processes and our supply chain, our manufacturing plants, but it's really to transform the product car into a smart computer, into a computer on wheels. And the 4 key areas we are tackling is basically the first one, autonomous driving. The second one is connectivity. The third one is basically the electrification of our engines. And then what we call the sharing economy, that we go away from an ownership model, like you have it in most Western countries, to a more and more shared business model. And the interesting point here is that despite these 4 different pillars, you could think they are isolated from each other. No, they are totally independent on each other. So if you're driving in autonomous mode, suddenly connectivity becomes totally different topic than before, because you have a lot of captive time. The customer is in your car, in your environment, and the customer can do in the future a lot of different things. And I will show you a few of the use cases we have already shown at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas this year. Connectivity is the key theme for today. And then obviously electrification, a big topic, and also the sharing economy, whether it's ride-hailing, car sharing, all these types of new business models which are emerging, where also BMW is invested through our Reach Now, Drive Now, and Park Now activities. So 4 really transformational aspects which are impacting the automotive industry. Why is digital suddenly becoming so important in conjunction with the product itself, our car? Because in the future it's no longer about forming metal and building engines. Suddenly a car company needs totally different skill sets. We are becoming a software and a technology company. And also the purchase behavior of our customers is suddenly changing. In the past, at least I'm already a pretty old guy, when we were playing cards, it was always 800 horsepower against 600 horsepower. And so these were these type of games you played in the past. This is no longer relevant for many, many young people. I mean, they think about, does this car allow me to import all my digital life I'm leading outside of the car into the car in a very seamless way? This is becoming really a purchase factor, an important criteria in the purchasing process. And there's a study from McKinsey from 2015 or 16, where basically customers of a premium mid-size car, typically a 3 Series model, say that if the digital experience of a car is not on par with competition, they would basically change brands, and 37% in average of our customers would say that. So it's becoming really an important purchase criteria, which means why are we doing that? So for us, we need to really invest in digital experiences that we are able to differentiate going forward. It's a key part of differentiation. It allows us also to go away from a pure point of sale monetization model where we sell a car, we transact the car, and then we never see the customer again, suddenly to a model where we can, on a daily basis, digitally engage with the customers, like you are used to with your digital services you're using on your smartphone, which means over the life cycle of a car basically is owned 5-7 years, you can keep suddenly your car fresh like you're keeping your smartphone fresh. Today your car just ages. Nothing happens. But this is basically then no longer the case. For us, obviously, building up a customer base is also something totally new. I mean, we are operating like an internet company, building a consumer asset, a customer asset for the company, which drives value for our customers, but also for ourselves, because that customer at the same time is an e-commerce channel. And if you think back to the autonomous driving topic before, in this captive time, there is hopefully quite some opportunity to do business with our customer as well. And then I think a really key thing which is going to happen through digitalization and digital services experiences in the car is the personalization. So think about a car which is fully adaptive, where all these 80, 90 computers which you have in your car can be basically fully controlled through the cloud. And you personalize your car as you would like to. The car knows when you're approaching, it and fully adapts, whether it's your in-car environment, your music infotainment system to your needs. It knows where you want to go. It knows what you want to do next. So these are really 3 important criteria why we believe digital experiences drive value. That's how we see the whole world. Everybody here, I guess, in the room has a smartphone, has its digital life on multiple digital touch points, mostly the smartphone, I guess, much more than PCs. And on the other side, we have the connected car. But no customer wants to lead a BMW digital life. So what does it mean? BMW's cars, the vehicles need to be an integral part of your digital life, like many other digital objects you have. And the linking element is what we call our One ID. So what you are used to from your mobile phones is what we have implemented in BMW. It's basically one customer profile which dynamically grows, which you can always take with you, which combines your connected life and the car-related functionalities, and which allows you to easily transition from one car to the next one, which means obviously you're not buying a car every year, but you would be able to take your full profile with you, and the car adapts and personalizes to your needs. But think about the sharing economy. I mean, for us, for BMW, it's important that if there are fleet management companies like an Uber or whoever, and they use BMW, at least when you enter into it, this car also adapts and gives you the maximum brand experience. Because suddenly this customer interaction, this customer relationship becomes much more important for us. And through that One ID, if you enter the car detects you, detects your phone, your profile, and the car basically plays the music you like. It automatically sends the next destination into the navigation system. Things just happen in a seamless way. And if you connect the car with a connected life through this One ID, we basically offer 4 different types of services. So our portfolio consists of services around what we call My Car. This is how I manage my car in the most efficient way. My Journey, so how do I get from A to B in the best possible way? Thinking not only about sending a destination into a navigation system, but also what do I do in order to find a parking spot? What do I do if I found a parking slot and parked the car? And how do I get to my final destination? All of that basically managed in a very seamless way. My Life is the integration of the services you know mostly from your smartphones, which means it's integration of your music streaming services. It's basically sharing services, communication services, using email services in the car in a most efficient way and in an adapted way that it fits to the car environment. So bring your digital life easily into the car. And then what we call My Assistant, which becomes a really hot topic, which is basically the integration of the newly emerging personal assistants like Amazon Alexa, Microsoft Cortana, Google Home, Google Assistant, all these types of things which are going to play a really crucial role in the whole car space going forward. All of those things are intelligently connected. We constantly learn through machine learning capabilities, seamlessly integrated and fully personalized and contextual. This is just the three segments in more detail. On the My Car side, it's really about, these are all the services BMW provides you, from contextual user manuals, basically to predictive maintenance functionalities where we read out car data, we suggest a dealer appointment in order to repair your car or service your car in a fully automatic and seamless way. My Journey is all about the mobility management, our core competency basically, where it's about planning your trip from A to B in a really efficient way. If you read out that your fuel is low or that your charging level of your electric car is low, we automatically plan in tank stops, charging stops, and make sure that you get on time to your next appointment. And then you have the My Life section where it's all about the productivity, the work environment, how to get that into the car. Also in autonomous driving mode, it's becoming more and more important. We have, for example, a Microsoft Exchange integration in our business fleet, where we make it really possible in a simple way to prioritize your email traffic, to answer your emails while driving without driver distraction. And then the final thing is, and that is one activity where we are closely cooperating also with Amazon, is the whole commerce idea. So we have our own e-commerce shops where you can basically purchase, like in an app store, your digital experiences, but it's going to be much more going forward, especially again in autonomous driving mode, where apart from media consumption, commerce becomes a really important point. If you combine that with intelligent personal assistants, oh, I just forgot to order this. Yeah, Alexa or whoever, please send this product home, or please deliver this product curbside to me as soon as possible. How does that work? We said we integrate basically the car as one new mobile device into the environment of digital touch points. So, and that is the car obviously is the touch point where we have all the sensors, cameras, radar systems, which give us a lot of contextual information about what the customer does and what he wants, and where we are differentiating as a car company. We cannot basically build what hundreds of internet companies are building, but we can do a better integration of those experiences. Today, we are basically looking at 5 different touch points where we surface our experiences. It's the car, smartphone, smartwatch, digital assistant like Alexa, and the web. And across those touch points, we try to horizontalize the experience and make that as seamless as possible for iOS and Android. The interesting thing is how a car develops, also in that whole autonomous context, is that suddenly it's no longer about 4 seats and you turn around when driving autonomously. No, I mean, the whole living space will change. It will be much, much closer to how you used to live. There will not only be this one display glued to the dashboard, there will be multiple displays everywhere. So, I mean, you need to find the right content in order to also bring that, the vehicle to life. And the interaction mechanisms change a lot. So from the pure iDrive controller, where you basically frickle around here, which is probably not very useful in entering URLs or other really complex input patterns, to the head-up display, voice control, and gesture control. There's a whole combination of how you can make life for customers much easier than it is today. And if you look at the portfolio, basically the experiences, I mean, we play out the things which matter on the right device at the right time. So on a smartwatch, obviously your user experience will be different than in the car. And whether it's a mobile notification you're getting on a smartwatch, whether you do the door-to-door routing when you have left the parking spot and you automatically get rerouted on your watch in order to get to your final destination, whether it's the remote control of car functions when you're not in the car but sitting at home, or whether it's through the smartphone where you get alerts to you need to leave now because we know there is traffic already, instead of standing in a traffic jam later on, and you get on time to your appointment. Digital assistance is a totally new way to interact from the home with your car. I see, or I know that it's cold outside, So Alexa, please climatize my car, and I'm getting into a heated car environment when I'm leaving home. And then we have obviously the web experiences, where it's a lot about managing your profile and your experiences. In order to get that done and to transform basically BMW to a much more software and digital company, we have quite some history already, actually. So BMW has started with digital experiences already in the early 2000 years, and we have today a fleet of 8.5 million connected cars already in the field. So 8.5 million connected cars, which are based on our connected drive systems. That's where we started off with, and they are basically present in 46 countries. And now we have taken the next leap, and that is basically what I've described before. We have now this one ID concept. We integrate the car on a cloud-based platform into the digital life of people, and we can now fully personalize and contextualize experiences across different touch points. And that's what we call BMW Connected, and it's basically available in 29 countries, and we have rolled that out in less than 6 months, basically. So a real global footprint from a volume perspective. Many people talk about digital transformation, and I've worked before for a smartphone manufacturer, and I've seen what disruptions can happen. And now you must think about a very traditional industry, super successful company, where suddenly things are going to change in a pretty significant way. So we need to adopt a totally different operating model than the classic car guys. They are developing 6 years for a car, to get a car out. They know exactly today in which year, on which day, in which hour the next 7 Series car will leave the factory, and we launch it. And I mean, I needed to tell my bosses, yeah, I can tell you now what I will deliver in the next 3 months, and I want a pretty significant amount of money, but I can't really tell you how the business case will look like. So that's also part of that digital transformation companies go through, because suddenly what companies are used to, they are pretty accurate in planning. You know what volume you will ship, what the revenue will be. Suddenly we don't know, because I mean, in many cases we don't even know how we monetize that. You know, what's the value of a customer? We need to experiment. So it's a lot of uncertainty basically companies need to go through. And we have chosen an approach where we basically operate like an internet company with 3 research and development hubs in Chicago, 1 significant market in Shanghai, I mean, very specific local market and huge, and then in Munich, because we need to be somehow close to our car guys. We have totally redone our processes, development processes, operational processes. We have everything built on a highly modern cloud platform like your services like Netflix are running on. So we have built on Microsoft Azure. And we basically need to make sure that we turn in fast cycles and get innovation out on a 2 months basis, while the car process is 5 to 6 years. And still, we said, we want to differentiate through the integration into the car. So there's an inherent conflict which we needed to manage, and I think we are making good progress on. So a very big challenge also, not from building product point of view, but from getting it done in a company. Then the basis for all these experiences is basically what we call the Open Mobility Cloud. It's a cloud-based platform where we are able to do a few things. The first one is everything is based on one profile. That's the one ID. Then we have a machine learning capability, which means we learn with our customers what our customer wants. We want to get rid of all these switches and all this stuff, because we know that normally at 6:30 in the morning you leave the house and we preheat your car. We know where you want to go. You don't need to mess around with your navigation system. It's all in already. You are set to go. So that is through machine learning. We learn your destinations. We learn what you want to do, if you allow us to do so. Behind that is an analytics capability. It's purely fact-based and data-based. And we are able to basically integrate all types of our own services, but also third-party services. As I said before, we are not going to reinvent the world. So these big ecosystems like Amazon or Microsoft are really important for us to get those experiences in the right way into our product. And then we play it out to all these digital touch points. Today it's Amazon Alexa, who knows what the next one will be. I mean, we are able basically to cover all types of experiences and allow our customers to select what he wants in an easy way. The One ID is really a profile which grows with you. It's the core of the mobility experience, and it's basically your BMW ID. Whenever you change a BMW, whenever you go to a Mini, it is always with you, and it knows how you want to drive your car and what you prefer. The analytics capabilities are used from our point of view for three things. The first one is we are measured like an internet company from an operational performance point of view, which means usage of our products, which means Net Promoter Score, which is a customer satisfaction index. We analyze trends and patterns. We look at product usage, and we basically create actionable insights, how we make money and how we do better experiences for our customers. The machine learning piece, this is what many people call artificial intelligence, deep learning. It's a pretty widespread buzzword right now. But the interesting thing is really you generate value for the customer out of the data you are collecting. That's the biggest thing. You make life with a product much better than it would be without. And that means that your mobility pattern, your behaviors are learned and basically are reflected in your profile, and then you are able to provide the right experiences to those accounts. Partners, it's the internal world we are integrating, but it's also basically our partners. We are easy to integrate in our platform in a very, very simple way, and allow for a very seamless solution and seamless experience. Interesting was what we have shown at CES as the outlook for what is coming next. And just imagine the setting. You have a 5 Series BMW, which is driving around Las Vegas fully autonomously. So that was really happening. And we had a whole round of journalists basically taking it with those 10 5 Series cars. And it was not about autonomous driving, the technology. It was what are you experiencing when you are in such a car and it's driving autonomously. So the first thing was the journalist needed to let loose his driving wheel, which for myself, it took me 2 minutes to say, okay, I can turn around and chat with the other people, and I felt comfortable. So that was the first experience. But then everybody forgot about autonomous driving. It was much more about what do I do now? And we had basically made up a plot where a family visits grandmother, and there are a few things happening. So the first one was we wanted to build a Prime-enabled car, Amazon Prime-enabled car. I guess many of you are probably Amazon customers. We basically want to provide the full offer set, which means you take your media content with you in the car, and the car adapts to the media content. That was what you see in the Prime Now, or what you could see in the Prime Now video case. So the boy who is sitting on one of the passenger seats has watched a movie on Amazon Prime. He didn't finish it. He got into the car detects it. The video continues on his tablet, and the car automatically adopts into a video mode. Just one example what you can do by combining media plus the car features. Then another interesting thing was that suddenly the family realized that, they forgot a gift for grandmother for her birthday. So basically you open up your own tablet which you brought into the car, you connect it to our cloud. We were connected to the Amazon cloud, and you could basically select a number of gifts which you wanted to hand out to your grandmother. So in real time, our customer or our guest there selected a gift. It was a Kindle tablet and some chocolate. And then basically the route you were on, where you wanted to go, was sent to Amazon. It was matched with the Amazon distribution centers and the vans which were on the road. And basically they returned to us an address where the handover point will happen. And basically we physically delivered the goods at the roadside during our trip without basically any detour. And that is one of the biggest things Amazon, for example, is trying to solve, because in most cases nobody's there when they deliver their boxes and their packages. So whether it's trunk delivery while you are in a parking lot and the car is there and we remotely open the car in order to deposit a package, or whether it's roadside delivery. So a lot of things are possible by combining basically the existing consumer electronics world, the world of the internet, with the car as a new mobile touch point. And I think there's, especially with autonomous driving coming and the time you can spend in the car to do different things, there's an endless space of opportunity also from a media perspective. And with that one, I want to thank you for your attention. And if there are one or two questions, please feel free to ask. Yep. Micro?
Thank you. My name is Tobias Siddemann. And my name is Tobias Siddemann. I'm based here in Bonn. I'm an entrepreneur. I also have touch with a lot of digital topics. And my question would be, you showed those 5 pillars of platforms, so to say, like smartphone and the digital assistant, and the car is a new coming to this collection. My question is, those companies that you mentioned, like Amazon and Google and so forth, here they were portrayed as partners, obviously. Of course, you also... Not only. So that's my question, basically. To what degree, of course, they are competitors to a certain degree. I mean, they also launched smartphones and they launched a lot of those platforms. And how do you deal with that? I mean, of course, you can create value for your customers, but at the same time, you kind of feed...
So there's a few principles.
With data, yeah. Who owns the data and so forth?
So first of all, car data doesn't leave the room, let's say, because, I mean, there's a liability. We are liable for the functionality of the car. So what is important for us really is that those guys we can't neglect, because this is what customers are using. I mean, we can't buy it ourselves, we can't build it ourselves, we can't scale it. So we need to do what the customer also wants. But you can do it in a way which works for both sides. So it's the classic what's called competition approach. In some areas we collaborate, in some we compete. Let's say what we are very strict on is, and you see that in the smartphone phase, in the smartphone industry, BMW tries to replicate in its own way, the Apple model. You have an ecosystem of devices and services, but you're in a way open, but the user experience is hopefully the best possible one by integrating software services and hardware in an ideal way. Yeah, we are not in the Google type business, because Apple is in the product business. Google is not in the product business per se, and that's why we have a bit of a problem there. Because if it happens what I have described before about the change of the interior, the change how you experience a car with autonomous driving and all of that. I mean, if you give up the customer interface, you are a commodity supplier, and you see exactly that in the smartphone industry. There's Apple through its integrated approach, which makes a ton of money. There's one Android player which makes money, which is Samsung, because of the volume play. Nobody else makes any money. And I mean, we are a top premium car manufacturer. We can't afford to be commoditized. So it's that thing. And also, if you imagine you buy a vehicle for 70,000, 80,000 euros, and then suddenly you get a Google screen in there, and your whole experience suddenly doesn't look and feel BMW, that's a problem for us. Because in the future, you won't only have your one screen there will be displays all over the place, you know, and your whole experience will be disrupted. So we have a very mixed approach to these guys. We cooperate with Microsoft, we cooperate with Amazon, we have Apple CarPlay in our car, so Google customers can bring in their Apple experiences if they want. We will integrate Google Home with our cars, but it's a case-by-case situation. One more? Yep.
Yeah, hi again.
Hey.
So you talked about big companies, big corporations like Amazon, Apple, etc. What's your policy in interacting with
small companies,
small startups? Yeah,
it's great because I mean we have briefly discussed before. So I think there's an opportunity also for small companies, because what we are moving away from is you need to tell me now what you will deliver in 6 years from now. which you can't, and I probably don't believe that you probably will exist still in 6 years from now. So we have a problem. And so with the approach we have and with the platform we have, we are able to really link in experiences. We have what is called a service hub in our experience, and where you can plug in, and if this thing doesn't work, I take you out going forward, you know. So we are trying to reflect that, because we believe we need a continuous stream of innovation, which is not only created by those big guys, but we need also smaller ones.
Like a POC model?
Yeah. Also we are running on, we are building MVPs, which is also minimum viable product, which is a real problem for car industry, I can tell you, because when the car leaves the factory, it is perfect and it will never be touched again. And I'm basically saying, yeah, let's try something out and you will see how things go. In 2 months, you will get something more. I mean, that's a culture clash, basically. But yes, we are able to work with that. Yeah.
Astrid, I'm a big fan of BMW, and the question is about security and attention of the driver, because sometimes smart technology is taking lots of attention of us. And the second question, please, where will be the data centers, if it will be also on the cloud?
So the first question about, so security, it's not about hacking, but more the passenger and driver security, no? Yeah. So that is something I also learned, because, I mean, if you build smartphones and you put an app on and you say, hey, cool, it works, then the car guys kick in and they will tell you, first I need to drive 20 million kilometers with a fleet of cars, and I will prove you that this is wrong, and this is wrong, because you have driver distraction here. You look more than 2 seconds there, and that's bad because you should focus there. So there is I mean, we need to do that in the context of the car, whatever we do. That's also why it's important for us that the interaction mechanisms give us a whole lot of opportunities. You know, if you want to put the iDrive controller for everything, I mean, it's pretty convenient actually if you're used to it, but that's not a model where you continuously interact with. But if you have an intelligent assistant in the car where you can in natural language talk to and say, hey, get the windshields on or off and do this and that, that's a totally different model, which allows us to still concentrate more on the road while doing something else. So we are very much integrated into that whole car model from a security point of view, that nothing unsafe leaves the factory. And the second question was the data centers. So we are first of all, we are basically controlling from a BMW point of view the pipeline between the car and the corporate back end. That is a secure pipeline, which is controlled. So if autonomous driving traffic goes through, that is basically managed here. We have also the possibility to get experiences through the smartphone into the car. And that is basically running on, in our case, on the Azure cloud, on Microsoft Cloud, which has basically local data centers across the world, where we are then complying to the local regulations and have basically the, like in China, where you need to be in the country. In Germany, it's pretty strict rules and all of that. Because BMW is about trust. I mean, we can't mess around with our customers' data. So that's how we handle that. One more, and then we're done.
First of all, thank you for explaining these issues in a simple language. And my question is, this one idea, in the use cases, it looks like it is only one driver, and there is not enough emphasis on if the driver is with family or with girlfriends or with colleagues. I mean, because it should be a social place, I'm in the car, and we cannot ignore them.
Yes.
One idea is, okay, clear, but, you know, whether the auto can recognize the people, the mood, and with colleagues.
Very good point.
This kind of use cases.
So one thing is that as one driver, you can attach different cars to your profile. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. You have multiple cars with your profile. And then you have obviously also multiple drivers for your car, the owner plus other drivers, and then you have multiple passengers in the car. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, you can get in with your phone, and then basically you detect, and you have a priority mechanism who gets basically access to which systems in the car. Today, we have not reflected what you just said, because we are ramping up our customer base there, it becomes a real important topic in the context of autonomous driving, where the passengers on the rear seats, they have a totally different requirement and behavior probably than the one in the front row, and you need to reflect those user behaviors. One thing we have shown at CES also is what we call the sound curtain, so that you have a limited sound space around the driver that I can listen to other music than somebody on the rear seats. And that is one of the first steps in order to personalize basically per passenger the experience. But it's a very valid point.
Okay. For this case, with HoloLens, it is also possible without other people hearing, just addressing your ears, the content that you want. Okay. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you very much.
Testing.
Testing. Okay. Yes. Testing. That one works. Okay, we've got one good mic. Guys at the back, could you see? It sounds like something's coming out now. Is that sounding good? Okay, so we're just going to hold off a minute or two more while we wait for the person sorting out the live stream to come over. So, yeah, if we could just hold off for 1 or 2 more minutes. You'll give me a sign, yes? Because I won't necessarily recognize. Okay, all right. Well, then, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to this session. And many thanks in particular to the EESC, the European Economic and Social Committee, which is a strategic partner of the Global Media Forum this year. It's been terrific to have them here. A really interesting body that was founded in the Treaty of Rome way back in 1957 and exists to represent civil society on the EU level. They have a stand outside here. It's really interesting to find out about them. So if you don't know much about the EESC, I certainly recommend heading over to that stand, and they can tell you all about it. And I'm particularly grateful for them for setting up this panel, because I think it really gets to the heart of the overall issue of this year's GMF, looking at diversity in all sorts of, from all sorts of angles. And the theme of this panel is integration and diversity, particularly from a European perspective, given that we have panelists from European countries here, from the UK, from Denmark, from Spain, and from Germany. And we're going to be talking about integration and diversity, and whether there's necessarily a tension between these two things, both of which are held up as positives, but each of which you could arguably say comes at the cost of the other. So we want to explore that a little bit in our discussion today. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about diversity over the last couple of days at the GMF, and it is generally held up to be a very good thing, particularly in Western societies. It enriches our societies, I think, is the message that we've had from an awful lot of panels over the last couple of days. But there's also a sense, I think, in many countries, particularly in Europe, but also in the United States, if we look back to what happened in the election last year, that you can have too much of a good thing. There is concern in many European societies that if you have too much diversity, it starts to come at the cost of social cohesion. You can have parallel societies emerging where people live in the same city but hardly really have any interactions with each other, that they stay within their confined communities, whether they're cultural or ethnic or some combination of that. And in some places, the term multiculturalism, which for a long time had been held up as something very positive, very sort of 20th, 21st century, has now become a dirty word. It's been leapt upon by populists in a sort of backlash against multiculturalism. And you even have centrist leaders like Angela Merkel saying quite openly that she thinks that multiculturalism has failed. So I think hence the ever-growing interest in integration as an attempt to kind of manage this diversity. And that's something that has taken on a stronger sense of urgency than ever before, I think, in the last couple of years, with the migration crisis that has hit countries like Germany, but of course other European countries very hard. And a country like Germany is thinking, well, you know, we don't want to make the mistakes of the past where large levels of immigration came in, for example, from Turkey, and those communities, to a great extent, didn't really successfully, or took a very long time to successfully integrate into mainstream German society. So we want to dive into these issues from a range of perspectives from our speakers today. And I'd just like to quickly, very briefly introduce them to you, but there's much more information about them on the pages that you have there, because they're all very illustrious people, and I can't mention everything about them just here. But I think I'll start from the left. So Anna-Sophie Allab from Denmark is the Foreign Affairs Editor of Radio 24 SYV, I'm going to say, 7. A Danish public service radio station. She also hosts their daily foreign news broadcast. And among other things, she's been posted by the European Commission to Africa and South Asia. And I think what really leapt out from her bio was that she is also a writer of thrillers and horror novels. So I'm quite interested to dive into those after this panel. Next, we have Jose Antonio Moreno Diaz from Spain, who is from the ESC. He's also a trained lawyer specialized in criminal law and law relating to foreign nationals, and he's also the spokesperson for the Forum for the Social Integration of Immigrants. So, very well qualified to be here. Angela Paloma Martin, also from Spain, is a journalist, a political advisor, and a communication consultant with a particular expertise in female leadership. So, very happy to have you here. Heinrich Kreft, to my right, is a career diplomat. He's been the German ambassador to Luxembourg since last year, but he's had postings all over the world: Spain, Japan, Bolivia, and Washington, D.C. And for several years, Ambassador Kreft was responsible for intercultural and interreligious dialogue, particularly with Islam and the Muslim world. And finally, Usama Hassan, who is an imam and the head of Islamic studies at Quilliam International, which bills itself as the world's first counter-extremism civil society organization, which promotes human rights and a pluralistic interpretation or pluralistic interpretations of Islam. And Mr. Hassan is a scientist by education. So thank you very much to our panel. Welcome. A round of applause, please. So let's get the ball rolling. I'd like to dive into our title, Integration and Diversity. They're both held up as good things, as we were just saying, but is there necessarily actually a tension between them? Is integration not an attempt to curb diversity, or will diversity inevitably always come at the cost of social cohesion? So I'd like to start with that, just as an opening question to everybody to kind of set the ball rolling. Anna-Sophie, I would like to start with you. Do you think that for you, and maybe from a Danish perspective, will integration and diversity always be a tension between them?
Well, I think the issue is that diversity will inevitably produce integration, and I think that integration is exactly what we fear in Western Europe, in Northern Europe at least. The crisis of fear that I think has gripped our nations is that we think that we are going to integrate with cultures that we perceive as very foreign to us. We think, oh my God, I'm not even having 3% of that, which could be a rural, maybe conservative culture from a foreign country. So we fight multiculturalism with everything we have. And I think it's a futile fight in many ways. What we try and do is to do away with immigration, integrate with immigration into our countries. But what we do away with is, to a large extent, the values and the rights that we have been fighting for within our own spaces. Theresa May said very few days ago that if we are going to do away with some of our human rights to fight extremism, well, then that will have to be that. And my contention is really that we need those rights to fight for our culture. I also think that what we need in this age is to say, we offer you a space to be an individual. And I think it's the only way to fare through this age of globalization, which is in fact an age in which we have to fight for the ideas that will dominate this time. So we will offer you a place where you can be an individual, where you will not be Sunni, you will not be a Shia, you will not be a woman, you will not be disabled, you will not be an angry white male, but you will just be an individual with the talents and whatever you come with to the society. Obviously, that is a huge, tremendous task to produce. It runs counter to right-wing propaganda, which divides populations and only focuses on immigration as something entirely negative. It runs counter to left-wing, at least factions of the left wing, which really focuses on identity politics of being transgender or gay or LGBTQ++. You know, it runs counter to also maybe even our intuition, which tries to group people into categories and get an overview of our world by looking at, you know, those boxes from a preconceived set of mindset. But we need to create that space. And a friend of mine he wrote to me yesterday and he said, I was on your channel and with the Finsbury attack in London, and I'm a Muslim, I'm a Danish Muslim in London, they asked me whether I drank alcohol. Well, that has nothing to do with the Finsbury attack. It's a euphemism to ask, are you one of us? Are you not one of us? We have to do away with all that. We have to be able to create a space where everyone can be people and not part of a group.
Thank you very much. So I think highlighting a key idea that integration is actually a two-way street. There's often a focus on integration as an idea of something that the incoming community has to adapt to the host community, but actually that this should be going in both directions. So I think we should definitely pick up on that later. I'd like to turn to Ambassador Kreft for your view on this question. Must there be a tension between integration and diversity?
Well, actually, in practice, in reality, there is. At least it's perceived by many people. But integration is of course it's no assimilation, and it doesn't mean elimination of foreign cultures. The idea is to well, peaceful coexistence, living together, but at the same time you have to deal with anxieties. You have to deal with angst, this German word which has made it into English, and we are living in a time where this is spreading, is growing. It's growing everywhere. It's growing in the US. We have seen this. It's growing in Germany. It's growing all over Europe. But also you look at other places. Well, you mentioned all the keywords already. Nobody wants parallel societies. Nobody wants ghettos. And I would totally subscribe that that diversity is enriching societies. Look at those countries who have received bigger numbers of immigration. Most of them have shown higher growth, have been more dynamic in modernization, but as in so many parts of life, it's always a question of quantities. So integrating, well, you can debate the numbers, but integrating into Germany 200,000, 300,000 a year is not perceived by the majority of the people as a problem. But if it's 1 million who come within half a year, then you definitely have a problem. So it's like medicine. Every medicine can turn into a poison if you take too much of it. So diversity levels of societies also are different. Our societies in Europe, at least this was the perception by many of our people, were homogeneous societies. But this was not true. This was not true for Germany. This was definitely not true for my current host country, Luxembourg. Luxembourg has 47% of the population are not Luxembourgers. And the country has the highest growth rate in Europe. So there are, of course, other factors which are responsible for this high growth. It's also a country without a right-wing party. Integration has worked fairly well, but of course it's not without problems, and these are debated. And I think this is quite normal. You have to debate these challenges, and only through internal debates, discussions, at the end you can come up with a consensus, a broad consensus that at the end, yes, integration is necessary, but that an increase of diversity is positive, is a plus for your society.
So I think perhaps we're going to return to that subject then, talking of striking a balance. We're talking about balance here between these two competing ideas. But I'd like to return to the idea whether here in Germany with the refugee crisis, what you're saying just earlier, that 500,000 in a short space of time, 1 million people in a short space of time is too much for a country to integrate, and thinking about, okay, what problems could that be bringing down the line. But now I'd just like to turn to Angela Paloma Martin, and I'd just like to hear your views on this question, whether there must inevitably be a tension, a contradiction between diversity and integration.
The first, thank you for inviting me to this. My English is a little very bad, so if you don't understand anything, please ask me. I think a priori, it might appear to be two contradictory words, diversity and integration, in my opinion. But I think that don't like that. Why? Because there's are two complementary words, in my opinion. Diversity is abundance, a lot of different things, you know? And integration is to constitute a wall. So, in my opinion, we can make a wall from diversity. Europe, this is a diverse continent, and we don't stop working every day to make Europe more and more inclusive. Integration is possible when we understand that diversity is a new opportunity. One day, we understood that the difference can unite us more than we can separate. With the economic crisis and migratory flows, we have created, in my opinion, a new crisis. What crisis? See dialogue and understanding as a problem and not as part of the solution. At the moment, we know that the diversity can be an opportunity, but we are, I think, we are afraid of integration, this word. If we are afraid of integration, it's because we see Europe weak. A weak Europe in the face of adversity. But adversity is about to become strong, and weakness exists, I think, to turn them into strength. I think definitely the best example to show that diversity is integration is what happening these days here in this building. No? We share ideas, experience, cultures, knowledge, and we are all different, but we all have something in common. Integration, I think, is accept that diversity unites us and makes us grow as individuals and as professionals too. If we want more democratic societies, integration is not an option. I think always integration is a decision.
Okay, thank you very much. So very interesting point of view there. So really claiming that integration and diversity can be very, very much complementary to each other. But I think an interesting closing idea that it has to be a decision, so we can come back to that later on. So Usama Hassan, I'd like to hand over to you now for your thoughts on this question, whether there will inevitably be a tension between integration and diversity.
Thanks, Richard. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. So firstly, thanks to DW for this honor. I'd just like to say that before Angela Merkel, David Cameron, our previous Prime Minister in Britain, actually said the same thing. He said multiculturalism is dead. Some years ago, actually, about 3 or 4 years ago, he said that. After one of the major terrorist attacks, actually. And I'll explain why I think both David Cameron and Angela Merkel are wrong. Multiculturalism is not dead. It has its problems, it has its flaws, but we need to think more, I think, and having discussions like this, we need to understand what we mean by all of these concepts before we can improve things in the future. And in the course of that, I'll gently agree and disagree with some of what my colleagues and the chair have said. And I'll base that on something I recommend, which I think is the best analysis I have seen by an academic. His name is Tariq Modood, a British Muslim academic based at Bristol University now. Professor Tariq Modood talks about 4 modes of integration. And he says these are all based on the basic values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. which we know from the French and the Americans, of course, but of course are widely accepted across Europe as the basis of a liberal democracy, and that's how Maudud presents them as well. And when I talk about these 4 modes, I would like to challenge, Richard, what you said in the beginning about German Turks successfully integrating or not, because I think we are using only particular, perhaps narrow, ideas of integration when we say that. So what are Maudud's 4 modes? He says the first one is assimilation, where you have a host culture and everybody else must fully absorb into that. And you might say that's close to the French model or the French secularist kind of model. The second one, he says, is individualist integration, which is similar to the first one, which is assimilationist, but there is limited freedom given to people in their homes, for example, as private individuals to be whatever culture they like. So, for example, in the public space, they're expected to be, stereotypical or quintessential French or Germans or Brits or whatever. But at home, they can have a completely different culture from their ethnic origin or from their religion or whatever they choose to, right? That's individualist integration, he says. But the public space is still dominated by a host culture or a light culture, as you might call it here. The third mode of integration he calls cosmopolitanism, where he says that you have different cultures competing or having a conversation in society. You have the host culture, the dominant culture, and then you have a whole load of other cultures which have come through integration and other forms. And Britain and France are possibly good examples of this because of empire. So, for example, in Britain we have millions of people from the Afro-Caribbean countries, from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Kenya, East Africa, and other former British colonies. So there you have different cultures having a conversation and kind of mixing and influencing each other, but you still have the idea of a dominant culture. The fourth one, and for Maudud, these are all in increasing order of preference, right? So in his view, these are getting better and better. And his fourth one is actually what he calls true multiculturalism, or diversity, he calls it. So for him, actually, integration, the best form of integration, he says diversity is the fourth type of integration, and it's the best one, and it is true multiculturalism. And that's where you have the same cultures, but there is no dominant culture or minority culture anymore. They're all equal on a level playing field, and society negotiates with this kind of melting pot. It's a melting pot where people work out. No one is preferred, no culture is preferred or dominant, and people forge, if you like, a new national identity which can be parallel, which can be very diverse. Now, of course, the right wing will generally favor the first one or two forms. The left wing will favor the third and fourth, and people will strongly react to these 4. But I think it's a very useful way of thinking about things, and therefore that's what I'd like to say is that what I would gently disagree with Sophie is about individualism. It seemed to me, forgive me if I misunderstood you, that you were putting a lot of emphasis on the purely individual, which is of course important, and Western individualist culture is obvious to people of Eastern origin like me, because Eastern societies are still much more collectivist and communalist, if you like. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes the right of communities and groups. So groups and communities with their culture is a very important part. It's one of the basic aspects of universal human rights, which I hope we will talk about more later. The other aspect about all of this is that in Britain, a lot of us would say there actually isn't a problem with parallel societies, as long as there's no hatred or violence being plotted. So, a top BBC reporter said to me some years ago, he said, in general, Britain, which is increasingly more irreligious, doesn't really care if there are pockets of really religious people, Orthodox Jews or devout Muslims or, practicing Hindus or Buddhists or whatever. Britain actually welcomes that. It's a nice aspect of diversity. The problem is if there's hate and violence and terrorism breeding in those pockets, which of course has happened in Britain with Islamist extremism and terrorism, and now increasing far-right extremism and terrorism with the attack on what used to be my local mosque, and where our first led prayers as an imam was at that Finsbury Park Mosque, which was attacked 2 days ago. So that was close to my heart, what happened there. And then I have to say that this is a long process, of course. And that's why I gently disagreed with you, Richard, about the Turks successfully integrating, because let's face it, there are barriers to these things, and the big one is racism. I mean, when I was younger, growing up in Britain from an Indian, Pakistani, devout Muslim background, but London is my first home, one of the reasons, as a young man, I was actually quite a radical Islamist activist, and even took part in defensive jihads abroad in Afghanistan and Bosnia, and my friends went off to Chechnya and Kashmir. I went to Afghanistan, other friends went to Chechnya, Bosnia, Kashmir, fought and died in those places because we were defending, as we saw it, Islam and the Muslims. One of the reasons we got involved into that, we were pushed by racism, experiencing racism on a daily, weekly basis in Britain. There were also pull factors, of course, like extremist ideology, the extremist interpretation of Islam, which said, you know, your identity is Muslim only and you have to be at war with the non-Muslim world. That kind of ideology which Al-Qaeda and ISIS still promote. But there are also these push factors, as I said. When you grow up as a young man told, you're not one of us, you don't belong here, go back to where you came from, because your color is different, because of the color of your skin, and because of your practices, the fact that your mum and dad, your sisters are wearing traditional Islamic veils or dress, your father is dressed in a traditional Islamic way. It is deeply traumatic and scarring. And I know that French Muslims of North African origin face immense racism. I have professional friends who tell me right now they feel it's institutionally racist in France. I know German Muslims and Turks and others who have felt this for decades. When I first was hosted kindly by DW 4 years ago, in 2013, after the terrorist murder of a British Army soldier, I was on a panel on a DW program, The Agenda, it's still there. I was on a panel with a Green MP from Germany, and he said to me on the program, he actually said to me that we have a problem with integration, we don't absorb kind of minorities very well. He actually said to me, Osama, you would have no chance of succeeding in mainstream German society, right? And this was me in Britain with a PhD and a 20-year scientific career. I had to work hard, but Britain was very welcoming, you know. If you work hard, you were treated as an equal, and I was a kind of respected, I hope still am, respected scientist and academic who taught for 10 years and worked in industry for 8 years in Britain. But in Germany, just 4 years ago, I was told, oh, you would have no chance because of your name and the color of your skin and the fact that you're a Muslim, you're so foreign. So I think from my own experience and with the theoretical framework I've pointed out, that there are barriers, and integration is a two-way or a multi-way process. And I hope we can confront some of these difficult issues and move forward. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you there, Osama, that, of course, integration is a two-way street. So what I said about the Turkish community earlier should not be interpreted as a criticism of the Turkish community. It was simply, that's certainly not the way I intended it. Ambassador Kreff wanted a quick comeback there, and then we're going to move on to Jose as for the last opening statement.
Well, I think that the picture you painted about Germany is not that clear cut. It's more diverse. You find people with migration background, Turkish migration background, in every parliament, on the local level, on the Länder level, on the federal level. You have ministers, you have heads of parliament. Look at a German hospital in well, you name the city, and I would bet that you find names which do not look German, and there's a huge number of Iranis in the German health system, but also from other countries. If you look at universities, the faculty is from multiple countries, so it's much diverse. It's much more diverse. Of course, you find places in the Ruhr area, in Berlin, where you find a lot of people where integration hasn't worked. That's true, but as you would expect with 4 million people, you find a whole variety of different different situations, and key is education. But I think we get into that.
Absolutely. We'll get to education. Okay, but thank you, Osama. An awful lot of very, very interesting points there that we'll dive into. So let's get now to the final of the opening statements from Jose. So your thoughts on this question about whether there are tensions between integration.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure, also an honor to represent the ECC in this panel. And it's a pleasure to see many colleagues from Brussels hearing to me in the moment. It's a burden to me to stay here. Two previous ideas until to start my speech about the integration and diversity. First of all, integration is not only about migrants. This is a very important idea. Integration is about majorities and minorities. Integration is about human societies. Wherever there are a minority and a majority society, there must be an integration process. It could be about Roma population, it could be about LGBT people, or even could be about different thoughts or different religions in homogeneous societies. It's not only about migrants and about migration. And second previous idea, we have to be very pedagogical in this point of the process of the migration in Europe. We are obliged to offer to our different civil societies and to our governments a new narrative about migration. We have to distinguish between economical migrants and refugees, because they are not the same. About refugees, we cannot speak and talk about quantities of refugees we can host or not. We are obliged by mandatory requirements of the Geneva Convention to support and to protect anybody that arrives to European country borders, running away from war and from persecution for racial, political, national origins. And on migration from economical questions, we have to choose in order what, I'm a trade unionist, and our level has to be put by the labor market, how and many and which profile do our different labor markets needs to avoid the people to come and to share our wealth, not misery, neither poverty. The main title is Integration and Diversity, and for me there is no contradiction between integration and diversity, first of all. As all known, integration is a two directions process. One about hosting community, and other about arriving people to different countries or different societies. To live in diversity, to accept diversity as itself, is part of integration. So we have to try to explain this as a mechanism of to make our societies richer, to learn from other groups or cultures, to share different points of view. At the end, it could be a title that is called in Spain during a lot of years is Equality to Life and Diversity to Life Together. What does it mean? It means that we need a hard core of common values or principles, human rights, universal values, universal principles, not only European values. We cannot enter in our Eurocentric perspective of the question, but we don't need a common fair play for all, mandatory for all, a hard core of a principle and values. Do the multiculturalism do that? I think the problem is not the multiculturalism. The problem is the political arrangement about multiculturalism, how to deal with the multicultural societies from the political point of view. This is the main problem. If we see multiculturalism as different people with different cultures that live separately without mixing, yes, multiculturalism is a problem. But the fail is how to manage politically multicultural societies. This is the main objective that we have to think about. The dream, the ideal, from my point of view, is intercultural societies with different cultures interacting among them, respecting the individual rights, of course, with the level of common human rights for all, independently of what you are going to do in your own religion, if you have religion, for example, because could be that people have, like me, that I have no religion at all. I use my freedom of conscience. It is not only the freedom of religion, for example. This is just to start, as I can say to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Terrifically interesting. A quick comeback from Anna-Sophie just before we move the discussion on.
Well, it was on Usama's comments on collectivity versus individual rights, or sort of individuality. I think really what we're seeing many, many places in the world right now is a big, big struggle between modernity and traditionalism, between sort of the control of the collective versus the right to individual self-determination. And Europe has always been, or for long, Europe has been a beacon of hope for people who wish to determine their own life, or wish to go free, get free from the control of the collective that they were in. And I think that as we are, and I think we're venturing into sort of an era of globalization, and this is not new. I mean, 2,000 years ago, you had 5 currencies in Europe, and they were found all over Europe. So we've always been, walking to other places and doing trade, etc. But right now, it's speeding up so much that we have to lay down fundamental core values and principles for what kind of societies we want to be. And I think that, of course, maintaining the rights to practice your religion, to wear what you want, etc., we have to underscore that Europe is a place where you as an individual is interesting to us, not you as a religious group, not you as a sexual minority, not you as a woman or a man, etc. You as you with your unique potential and contribution. And if we cannot sort of get a way of sort of establishing a platform in the public spheres, media also, where we don't reproduce stereotypes, where we don't sort of typecast people into roles, but where we do counter racism, counter sort of preconceived notions about people, I think we will fail this era.
We've been very focused on Europe so far, but I'd like to bring in ask for a couple of comparisons. And I wonder, in some of what we've talked about, I've heard echoes of actually the way things are more in the United States. The United States is obviously a country that has kind of embraced the hyphenated identity, that you can be Pakistani American, you can be Indian American, you can be African American, and that moves into other groups too. You can be LGBT American, you can be all sorts of things. Does America kind of handle all of this better, do you think? Or did we find out last year that this whole edifice was about to crumble, to explode? Anna-Sophie.
Well, I think to some extent they do, because they communicate common values very, very clearly. So you can be American, you are American, no matter what subculture you come from, you are very, very American. And that is it's pervading or pervasive in your identity. So I think also offering a sort of economic model that lets everyone thrive and work and use whatever they have, whereas a lot of European systems are kind of geared to a very homogenous population. So I think both culturally and sort of economically, America absorbs immigrants much, much easier than we do.
Usama.
Yeah, I think there are many interesting models around the world, and certainly the US is a fascinating one. But of course, it is a nation of immigrants, built on a genocide of the native population, let's not forget, in just the last 3 centuries. So And that's one of the reasons America has been very successful at what it has done in those last 3 centuries. And, I have 3 brothers all married to Americans, and I love my visits to the United States because it's so different in that sense to Britain and to Europe. There's a lot to learn, I think, from there. And of course, the ideals behind the American Republic are, essentially the same as the ones behind the French Republic. So we have those core values, if you like, common in Europe and in the United States. But again, I'll mention the R word again, racism. That hasn't gone away. You talk to African Americans, and they will not recognize the America of these exalted values which you see in the Constitutional Declaration, because they haven't really lived that until very recently. So it's a struggle within America as well to live up to its high ideals. And I personally think that we should try to learn from good practices anywhere in the world, but there are always local differences within our societies which shape the way things work. So, for example, the world of Islam, as an imam, I should say something about that. The Muslim majority world actually had a strong tradition for centuries of pluralism and diversity, based on recognition of religious freedom, especially of Jews and Christians, right from the beginning, and of other nations as well. So, for example, the Hindus in India, where Muslims ruled as a minority for centuries, for example. Spain was very famous, of course, for the 800 years of Islamic rule and the convivencia between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And that continued through the various Islamic empires, and there were great strengths there. There were weaknesses there as well. There was discrimination against non-Muslims, for example, or against women. There was the usual power politics, which pervades all of that. But the reading of the Quran I take, I find that the Quran speaks about very high ideals and values. One of the greatest verses of the Quran says that God created humanity from male and female and from nations and tribes, that we may get to know each other, to learn more about each other, and that the best of us in the sight of God, the most noble, are those whose conduct is best, who are most righteous. And that is a teaching which is basically Martin Luther King, but 13 centuries earlier. And Muslims are very proud of that. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his last sermon in Mecca was delivered on the Mount of Mercy. And he said the same thing. He said men and women are equal. He said slaves are equal, which was a revolutionary thing to say in 7th century Arabia. And he said nobody is superior to anybody else, whether you're black or white, Arab or non-Arab. Again, revolutionary to say that to who had a superiority complex over non-Arabs and often still do. But in the 7th century, he said the only distinction is your character, your conduct, is how good you are as a person. Now, of course, a lot of the Muslim majority world fall very far short of that ideal, and within our history, we also fell short. But I think those exalted ideals are there, which are also there in the French, the American, and other European self-understandings. And I think, I agree with you, this new era of globalization, to live together, we really have to focus on values, articulate our values. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I believe, is a great starting point, and we have to take it seriously again and articulate those values and agree on what exactly are our shared values, what is our social contract in these kind of new societies with globalization, with freedom of movement and capital and everything else. What is the social contract? Because every society needs a social contract to live together, to understand what our shared values or responsibilities are.
Well, I would like to pick up on exactly that, the idea, the point of shared values. Jose was also talking about that. This is something that many societies have been struggling with. If you think of comparing, say, Germany and Britain within Europe, Germany has had this debate that keeps coming back about the idea of a Leitkultur, so a kind of dominant, guiding culture that of the host nation that arriving communities need to kind of settle beneath. In the United Kingdom, there's often talk of British values, but whenever someone tries to define what those British values are, there's a huge debate and then disagreement about whether those values really are British and whether they're in any way distinctive to Britain. I'd like to hear from all of you. What would you say would be a basis for shared values? Usama, you just mentioned the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Jose, maybe you'd like to pick up, like, what would be the basis of those shared values?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Perhaps the golden rule is that was seen previously say, a hard core of principles and values, and based on Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No, this is freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, of religion, gender equality, and on these grounds, nationalism is always an obstacle, is always an impediment. Why? Because nationalism remarks differences, false differences, most of them, among human beings. And we don't need to share good practices like Usama said previously. What we do need? We need to ask to our governments to explain our societies what migration is. We have been receiving migrants during decades, but nobody talks our societies why they are coming, who they are, which are their customs, which are their values, which difference or which religions do they practice. So our societies does not know anything about the new neighborhood. So some people expresses some differences in thinking about migrants because they have no information in many of the cases. So institutional power has to explain national population why the migrants come and why they are here and what they are doing and why do we need migrants in our labor markets, for example. It's a question of, as I said before, changing the narrative in a very pedagogical way to encourage the civil society to deal with the difference into our different societies, into different cultures, different religions, and different people in a global society that is changing every day.
I'd just like to pass over to Ambassador Kraftier, but just to return again to this question of values. I mean, we keep coming back in Germany to this debate about a Leitkultur. Also, particularly with focus on Islam, critics will come up and ask whether Islam belongs in Germany. But in Germany, of course, there is the Constitution, and you only have to read a few of the articles in the Constitution to see actually a lot of, the same kind of language that you get in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights right there in the Constitution. The question is, though, and I think I come back to something that José just said earlier in his opening remarks, talking about, shared values that are mandatory for all. How do you make values mandatory? And what is the consequence for someone who doesn't agree with those values?
Well, the debate which is now on in Germany, it's not the first time. So it comes in with waves. And the first one was in 2000 when the then head of the Christian Democratic Parliamentary Group, Friedrich Merz, came up with that word of Leitkultur, but borrowing the word from Bassam Tibi, the Syria-born Islam expert and political scientist at the University of Göttingen, who had coined the Leitkultur, but not for Germany, but for Europe. So his idea was we need in Europe a Leitkultur, which goes along with Declaration of Human Rights, with democracy, with all the basic values we consider as European values or Western values. So this was the idea, and the debate became very, very political and politically poisoned. So the discussion was along party lines. So the conservatives in favor of a Leitkultur, and the liberals and the social democrats and Greens and the leftists against it. But somehow this debate came to an end when it re-emerged 2 years ago when we had the big influx of migrants and refugees. And again, a couple of months ago, when after the referendum in Turkey, when a majority of those Turks who voted for the new constitution introduced by Erdogan, definitely a constitution with much less democratic substance than the current one. So this initiated a new round of debate, and of course currently we're in election time. So, but the interesting thing is it's no longer along party lines. So you find people on the Social Democratic side, even on the Green side, who say, yes, we need some sort of Leitkultur, but it depends what they understand in Leitkultur. Some say, well, that's the Grundgesetz, that's the constitution, and what's in there, that's the Leitkultur. And everybody who wants to live in Germany has to live according to the constitution, has to live according to the laws. And if you're not living according to the laws, of course, you have to bear the consequences. But of course, the discussion is much broader, and people start discussing if shaking hands is part of the German culture, if listening to Bach, to Beethoven, reading Goethe and Schiller, if this is the part of the canon of what is perceived as German culture. So there is no consensus on that, and I can predict there will be no consensus, because it's not possible beyond the constitution, beyond the laws.
And I mean, that's true. Whenever these debates come up, they tend to sort of founder on these examples, which quickly become ridiculous. The notion of sort of compulsory listening to Bach of an evening in order to live in Germany. Yes, so Angela.
It's possible, yeah. I would like to say something about the value and continue with him. I think that integration is a great cause of our present. If we have better education, I think we will have better values. If we have better values, we can understand what is happening outside and within our countries, I think. If we understand what is happening, we can act well and on time. I think the key is education and new educational policies leading to better integration and to be more competitive. Diversity is a value that must be harnessed, and I like